Welcome, listener, in the shadows. We bring stories into the light. Join me as we explore the encounters no one speaks of and the things that watch from the dark. If you're still here after all that, you already know the kind of stories we tell. The kind that crawl under your skin, that echo in the quiet when the episode ends. If you want to carry a piece of that darkness with you, wear what haunts you. Our exclusive line of merch is made for listeners who feel more at home in the uncanny, the unspoken, the things that don't make sense in the daylight. Shirts, hoodies, and other gear, designed with that same atmosphere of dread, mystery, and whispered wrongness. Candles support the channel, feed the stories. You can grab yours at https://theshadowsprintify me, and as always, don't look behind you. The Eighth Sacrament, Chapter 1. The Masks of St. Leontius. Father Michael Rourke hadn't worn the collar in 8 years, but as he stood before the warped wood doors of St. Leontius Parish, soaked to the knees in swamp water and dusk rain, he found himself touching his throat, searching for it out of instinct, as if vestments could still grant him authority in a place like this. The church rose from the mud like a blistered wound in the land. The bell tower sagged left, overtaken by creeping vines that pulsed faintly in the stormlight. Its crucifix had no Christ, only a rusted iron nail in the center, as if something had been torn off violently. The parish grounds were still. No voices, no birds, no wind, only the soft hissing of rain and something lower, a hum beneath the soil, like breath through old pipe organs. He stepped forward, one boot sinking into the muck. The rain hadn't washed away the rot, it had thickened it. The air smelled like mildew and sacrament wine left out too long, acid and iron. Then the door creaked open, not wide, just enough, and from the dark beyond it, a face. No, not a face, a mask, iron, mouthless, seamless, 2 black eye holes, no eyes inside, just void. The figure bowed, slowly, precisely, then stepped aside to let him in. Michael hesitated. He had been a man of faith once, had spent his life parsing between the symbolic and the literal, bread as body, wine as blood, heaven as home. But there was nothing symbolic about the smell that wafted out from that doorway. Something sour, something burned. He stepped inside. The sanctuary was silent, utterly, crushingly silent. Wood groaned underfoot, old pews lined in careful order. Candles lined the walls, but none were lit. Their wicks had burned to blackened nubs, wax melted and congealed like blood pooling at the edges of altars. At the far end of the nave, near the pulpit, they knelt. The congregation, 20, maybe 30 figures, all clad in heavy black robes, all wearing iron masks like the one who let him in. None turned, none spoke, none moved. They knelt facing the altar, heads bowed in absolute synchronicity, the kind of stillness that no ordinary group could maintain. Michael felt his throat tighten. He had seen plenty of devotion in his time, but this wasn't reverence. This was submission. He moved slowly down the center aisle, boots echoing on the warped floorboards. Each step brought him closer to the altar, and to the pulpit behind it, carved with imagery that disturbed even his seasoned mind. Not the crucifixion, but children painted in iron leaf, screaming, arms raised not in worship but in offering. The ceiling above them was covered in icons he didn't recognize. No saints, no seraphim, only masks. He stopped at the altar, ran his hand over its surface. Cold, recently scrubbed, smelled faintly of vinegar and something older, a copper tang. Behind him, one of the masked figures stood, not all at once, not violently, just rose. Michael turned. "Are you the father?" he asked softly, a long pause. Then from behind the iron mouthpiece, a voice, not muffled, but clear as bells in mist. No father but pain, no voice but silence, no flesh but ash. Michael felt the blood drain from his face. "Then who leads the flock?" he asked. The figure stepped closer, raised one hand, pointed toward the floorboards beneath the altar, right where he stood. And in that moment, Michael realized the altar wasn't fixed to the floor. It was a lid, and the pulpit, a lever mechanism. He stepped back. "There's something beneath," he whispered. The figure nodded once. The eighth waits. Chapter 2, Sister Constance. Michael spent the night in the rectory behind the chapel, though rectory was generous. It was little more than a 2-room shotgun shack, half swallowed by moss and time. A cot, a wooden crucifix without a figure, and a candle stub were the only things in his room. He couldn't sleep, because the floor creaked in patterns, not random, rhythmic, as though someone or something walked in slow, patient circles beneath him, always beneath. When the knock came at dawn, it startled him more than it should have. 3 taps, nothing more. He opened the door to a woman in a grey veil and weather-beaten cassock. She looked nearly 70, though her eyes were clear, too clear, like still water that went too deep too fast. She carried no mask. "You're Michael Rourke," she said. "Defrocked in '99, Diocese of Baton Rouge." Her voice was soft, but it carried like liturgy, each word deliberate. She gestured to the table behind her, a simple spread of bread and black tea. "Eat before the bells. You'll need strength." Michael narrowed his eyes. "You don't speak during services, but you'll speak to me. Silence is reserved for the worthy. You are not yet among them." She sat, folding her hands in her lap. She didn't eat. "Who are you?" "Sister Constance. I shepherd what's left of the St. Leontius flock." Michael remained standing. "And what flock is that, exactly? You're not recognized by any Catholic council. You've severed from Rome." She smiled, not kindly. "Rome severed from truth long ago." She motioned to the untouched bread. "Please, it's not poison." Michael sat slowly. He took a bite, though it stuck in his throat like clay. "And what truth are you preserving, sister?" "The one Christ did not have time to reveal, the one that comes after forgiveness." She leaned forward, placing both hands flat on the table. "He died before the cycle was complete. We are completing it. You're talking about the so-called Eighth Sacrament." "Not so-called. It is the final cleansing, the only one not for the soul, but for the blood." Michael stared. "You think sin is hereditary?" Sister Constance nodded. "Sin is seed. It's planted through generations, nurtured in wombs, buried in bone marrow, and it must be burned out, not confessed." He leaned back, brow furrowed. "And how exactly do you propose to burn it out?" Constance's face darkened, though her voice stayed smooth. "Pain is the purest flame, willing pain freely given." Michael thought of the masked congregation, the children he hadn't yet seen. "That's not Catholicism, that's abuse." Her eyes glittered. "The line between devotion and violence is always drawn by those who have never been close enough to hear God whisper back." Later, she led him back through the chapel. The congregants were gone. Only the masked acolyte from yesterday remained, sweeping ash into a copper bowl. Michael stopped her just before the altar. "There's something beneath here." "Yes," she said simply. "What is it? The beginning?" "Of what?" She stepped around him and knelt before the altar, ran a hand lovingly along its edge. "Of unmaking." Michael turned to her, frustrated. "Why me? Why invite me here at all?" Constance stood, brushing dust from her knees. "Because you were cast out for speaking truth. That makes you useful, but also dangerous. And if I leave, you'll forget. The Eighth takes memories before it takes flesh. You've already breathed it in. You're bluffing." "Am I?" She touched his forehead. And for a second, less than a second, he wasn't in the church anymore. He was beneath it. He saw an altar not of wood, but bone. Heard cries not of pain, but something older, something inhuman trying to mimic it. He felt teeth in his stomach, curling upward like roots. And then he was back, gasping, sweating. Constance was gone. Only the masked figure remained, sweeping ash. "The Eighth waits," it said, voice like iron dragged over salt. Chapter 3. The children do not blink. The children of St. Leontius were perfect. They were clean, silent, polite. They played with wooden toys, hand-carved, painted in ochre and black. No screens, no talking, no laughter. They never fought, never wept, never called out for their mothers, even when they scraped their knees or dropped their dolls into the muddy ditch behind the chapel. They watched more than anything else. From windows, from the shadows between pews, from beneath the dripping awning of the schoolhouse with its boarded windows and warped chalkboards. Father Michael stood by the edge of the playground, if you could call it that, a patch of gravel and dying grass marked by a rusted swing and a crooked slide. 5 children played in absolute silence. A little girl stood at the base of the slide. A boy crouched, slowly pulling apart a stick of bark. The others stared at the trees. They didn't blink. That was the first thing he noticed. Not once. He checked his watch. 8 minutes. 8 full minutes of fixed, glassy eyes. He approached the girl at the slide. She wore a white smock dress, crisp, unwrinkled, a black ribbon tied at her collar. "Hi there," he said gently. "My name is Michael." No response. "I'm a friend. I'm visiting the parish." The girl looked up at him slowly, too slowly. Her eyes were blue, but there was a strange film across them, like condensation on glass. Her pupils didn't contract, didn't track. She wasn't blind. She just wasn't there. "Do you speak?" he asked. She opened her mouth. Inside, her tongue had been marked, branded or tattooed with a symbol he couldn't recognize. A vertical line crossed by 7 tiny hooks. She didn't make a sound, just showed it, then closed her mouth again. Michael staggered back. From behind him, a soft voice spoke. "They're consecrated." He turned. Sister Constance, standing in the weeds at the edge of the schoolyard, hands clasped neatly in front of her. They are what happens when the sacrament is followed. Unbroken bloodline, cleansed root. Michael shook his head. "They don't talk. They don't need to. They don't blink." She smiled. "Why blink? What is there they haven't already seen? Are they possessed?" Constance stepped closer. "No, Father, they're empty. Possession requires will. These children were born through the 8th. Pain before conception, silence before breath. They are pure vessels. No hunger, no fear, no impulse towards sin." He stared at the little girl, now tracing a slow spiral into the gravel with her heel. "They're not children. They're the answer to centuries of failure. You've mutilated them. We've perfected them." Later that night, Michael wandered the hall of the rectory again, unable to sleep. He poured himself a glass of water. The tap ran red-brown, smelling faintly of minerals and rust, and sat at the desk by the window. He opened his notebook, began scribbling details, names, dates, questions. But when he went to write children, his hand froze. His fingers trembled violently, out of sync with thought. He looked down and found that his handwriting wasn't his own. He'd written the same word 6 times, vessel, over and over and over. Then a soft knock at the door, 3 raps, identical to the ones that had summoned him the day before. He opened it. The girl from the playground stood there, white dress, bare feet, blue eyes, still unblinking, in her outstretched hand, a small cloth bundle. He unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a tooth, human, still bloody, tied to it, a scrap of scripture paper torn from a Bible. Luke 18:16. "Suffer the little children to come unto me." She turned and walked into the darkness without a sound. Chapter 4. Below the altar. The candle was waiting for him. A thin, tapering stick of black wax stabbed into the dirt beside the chapel. Lit, burning unnaturally slow. The flame flickered green at its center, casting no smoke and no scent, only light that bent strangely, as though reluctant to leave the wick. Michael stood in the rain, staring down at it, heart pounding. It hadn't been there 5 minutes ago. At its base lay a bundle of knotted cloth. Inside, a rusted key, large, ornate. The handle was shaped like an inverted crucifix, stylized with open roots in place of Christ's body. It was a key to a door he had not yet seen, and something inside him already knew where it led. That night, after the masked congregation filed out, after the last iron face bowed toward the altar and vanished into the foggy dark, Michael returned to the sanctuary alone. The candles had relit themselves. He didn't question it anymore. He stepped up onto the dais, feeling the warmth radiating from the boards beneath. Not heat, body warmth. He knelt before the altar, ran his fingers along the base. There, a keyhole hidden beneath a small carved panel. The iconography was worn but unmistakable. A fetus crowned with thorns. He slid the key in. It turned with a hiss and a faint mechanical grind, like bones scraping metal. The altar shifted. With a groan, slow, like wood remembering movement, the entire slab slid back on hidden runners, revealing a spiral staircase descending into the earth. No torch, no lantern, only a glow rising faint and fungal from below. Michael hesitated at the edge. The breath coming up from the depths didn't smell like rot. It smelled like myrrh. The crypt wasn't made of stone, not exactly. The walls were ribbed, organic, calcified like coral, streaked with iron and amber veins. The ceiling arched overhead in a twisted Gothic curve, dripping with condensation. Symbols were etched into every surface, some Latin, some Greek, most unrecognizable. Michael moved deeper, hand on the damp, uneven wall for balance. Then he heard it, not voices, not prayer, breathing, hundreds of them, shallow, rhythmic, some fast, others wheezing, a discordant choir of lungs. And then a scream, high, human, cut off too quickly, like it had been swallowed. Michael froze. The hairs on his arms rose. He turned toward the sound, deeper into the tunnel, and there at the far end stood a single masked figure holding a small candle that didn't flicker, even in the heavy air. The mask was different from the others, thicker, cast entirely in rusted iron. But where the others had no mouth, this one did. A long vertical slit, parted like a wound, no lips, just torn metal. It bowed, then turned and began walking into the dark. Michael followed. They passed alcoves filled with strange shapes, forms suspended in transparent wax or resin. Human in silhouette, but wrong in detail. One had no face. Another had eyes stitched shut with golden thread. A third was fused at the hip to a tree root, pulsing faintly. The masked guide stopped before a heavy wooden door. Upon it was carved a phrase in deeply etched Latin, per passionum fit purificatio. Through suffering comes purification. It opened without touch. Inside, a chamber lit entirely by rows of candles embedded in the walls like teeth. Their flames bent inward toward the center of the room, where a stone table sat beneath a hanging iron cruciform. Atop the table, a child, or what had once been one. The body was motionless, arms laid flat, chest exposed. The skin had been carefully peeled in a perfect cross-section, revealing dark veins that pulsed slowly, and something moving just beneath them. Small, white roots. They squirmed gently, like fingers in shallow water. Michael's vision swam. A voice behind him, not from the masked figure, but from something deeper, spoke without sound. "We do not kill, we transfigure." He spun, eyes wild. But the figure was gone. He was alone in the chamber, except for the body, and the movement beneath its skin, which had started to match his breath. Chapter 5. The cleansing. Michael didn't remember being led back to the surface. He woke in the rectory, alone, drenched in sweat, a ringing in his ears, like liturgical bells struck underwater. The morning was grey, a blanket of fog dragging over the chapel grounds like wet gauze, but something had changed. The silence was heavier now, less reverent, more expectant. The parish didn't move like before. They glided. Not a sound, not a murmur of breath. Every motion mirrored the next, as though choreographed by a will behind their own. The children were absent. Michael was summoned at dusk. A masked boy knocked 3 times. This one smaller than the others, but already hollow-eyed. He held no candle, no rope, just waited. Michael followed him out, across the grass, past the church, and into the woods behind the chapel, along a narrow path lined with stones painted the color of dried blood. The trail ended at a wooden arch. Above it, a weather-worn carving of the Virgin, but her face was worn away, smoothed by time or hands. Beyond it, a clearing, ringed in torches, a pit in the center, a platform above the pit, and upon it the table, not stone this time, iron, rust-colored, scarred, chains at each corner. The congregation gathered in silence, all masked, all barefoot. They formed a perfect circle around the platform. No words, no movement, just waiting. Then Constance emerged from the tree line, still in her grey habit, but her veil was gone. She looked taller here. The torchlight painted deep grooves into her face. Her hands were red, not with blood, but some kind of thick oil that shimmered when she moved them. Behind her, the child, the same girl from the playground, the one who'd shown him her branded tongue. She walked willingly, serene, her white dress clean. Michael's breath hitched. "She's just a child," he whispered. "Jesus, she's just a child." "She's a vessel," a voice whispered behind him. "And the vessel must be emptied." He turned. A man in a mask stared back, blank, flat, but Michael could feel the smile behind it. Constance began to speak. No amplification, no shouting, but somehow everyone heard. In the garden, pain was not born, but in the Exodus, pain became holy. The Father does not wish to hear our tongues. He wishes to taste our wounds. and so we offer blood not in violence, but in supplication." She turned to the child. "Is your lineage clean?" The girl nodded once. "Have you eaten?" She shook her head. "Do you consent to the eighth?" She raised her hands and folded them over her chest. "Then bear witness to the unmaking," Constance said. "Let your bodies remember what your minds must forget." The crowd knelt. Michael stood frozen. He should have run, screamed, charged the platform, but he didn't move, couldn't. Constance removed a long iron rod from the pit. It glowed orange at the tip, heated in coals below. She raised it. The girl lay down. Chains were fastened, and the ritual began. Michael didn't remember it in a straight line. He remembered sounds, the hiss of skin against metal, the quiet singing from the masked congregation, no melody, just vowels. The girl's breath rapid, shallow, but never quite screaming. And above all, he remembered the voice. "This is not pain. This is listening. We speak now in sinew and marrow." The girl's chest rose and fell, and kept rising. Too far, bones shifted in ways they shouldn't. Something pulsed beneath her ribcage. A second heartbeat. No, not a heartbeat. A flutter, like insect wings pressed into flesh. Michael staggered back. He looked to the crowd. They were weeping now. Oil streamed from their masks, or maybe blood. It didn't matter. They were worshipping something, not the child. Not God, but the thing emerging from the child's spine. A pale tendril, long, feathered, twitching, reaching. Constance held it gently in both hands. She kissed it, then pressed it against her chest, and it sank into her. Chapter 6. The hollow road. Michael ran. Through the woods. Through mist so thick it clung like wet cloth, curling around trees like reaching fingers. His breath tore ragged through his chest, lungs raw from the smoke of the sacrament fire still lingering in his sinuses. His boots pounded the overgrown trail, mud sucking at each step. No light guided him now, only the faint hope of the road that brought him here, the road that, if it still existed, would take him away. He burst through the tree line, onto the gravel shoulder where the county road should have been. But there was no road, only dirt. Dry, cracked, and colorless, like it hadn't seen rain in years. Michael froze. Ahead, a path stretched into the trees, narrower than it should be. Wrong. He looked to his left. A low, barbed fence extended along the edge of the clearing. Not barbed wire, thorns, vines with spurs the size of fingers, pulsing slightly, curling inward at his gaze. He turned back the way he came, but the trail was gone. The forest stood still, silent, waiting. Michael staggered forward along the only path left, hoping, praying for cell signal, or a radio tower, or the glint of a distant truck's headlights. But the deeper he went, the stranger things became. He walked for over an hour. The path never curved, never bent. It simply continued, ruler straight, through a corridor of unnatural forest. The trees weren't right. Each stood equidistant, each the same height. Their bark was smooth, too smooth. Their leaves identical, even down to the holes where insects had fed. A pattern, a clone, and their roots, they were exposed. Not underground, but curled up and over the surface like veins on a withered hand. They pulsed, slow, deliberate. As if breathing, he came to a clearing. In the center, a signpost, wooden, crudely nailed together. No words, just a symbol. The same symbol carved into the girl's tongue. A vertical line, 7 hooks. Below it, someone had scrawled, not in paint, but blood. "Turn back. This is the only mercy left." Michael collapsed at its base, trembling. He pulled out his notebook, flipped to the map Sister Constance had handed him on his arrival. It had shown a clear path, the road, the chapel, the graveyard. Now the map had changed. The ink ran in places. Lines he hadn't drawn spidered out like roots. New locations were labeled in handwriting that wasn't his. The bleeding chapel, the orchard of teeth, the mouth, and written at the center, scrawled like an afterthought, "He is already part of it." Michael dropped the map, backed away, and then he heard it. Not whined, not birds, weeping. A soft, endless sound coming from beneath the dirt. He dropped to his knees, pressed his ear to the soil. It was hollow, and beneath him, thousands of voices whispered in agony, not prayers, confessions. He sprinted back down the path, but the forest had changed. Trees closed in behind him. The roots now reached up from the dirt, grasping. One snagged his ankle, tearing open his jeans, drawing blood. He screamed, fell, and when he stood again, he wasn't alone. A figure in a red cassock stood between the trees. No mask, just skin pulled tight across a skull-like face. No eyes, just empty sockets bleeding black. It raised one hand, pointed back the way he came. "You cannot leave once named." Michael turned. The chapel's steeple now loomed at the end of the trail, though he hadn't walked back. The structure pulsed with a dull red glow, like something breathing behind its walls. "The sacrament is incomplete," the figure whispered, "and the vessel is still warm." Chapter 7. Remembering the wound. Michael dreamt of blood in milk. A glass tipped slowly in a trembling hand, red spiraling into white, the whirlpool of a wound swallowing sweetness. He heard humming, a lullaby half remembered, and something else behind it, a voice with no mouth. "We never leave the garden, we only forget the gates." He woke gasping in the rectory, sweat clinging to his skin like oil. The bed beneath him, not the same as the one he remembered. This one had no frame, just a slab of concrete draped in woven wool. No windows, only candles, and on the bedside table, a silver bowl of water. Inside it floated a single black seed. Michael stared at it for a long time. It pulsed faintly with each breath he took. He didn't drink. The parish had changed, or rather, revealed itself. Gone were the painted smiles and softly spoken platitudes. The congregation now walked openly in their masks, robes stained with ash and something darker. They no longer acknowledged him as an outsider, only as a vessel that hadn't yet been filled. Sister Constance greeted him that morning with open arms. Her hands were stained with something yellow. It smelled like vinegar and rot. "You've been chosen to witness the history," she said. "Not all do. It means he remembers you." "Who?" Michael asked, throat raw. "God, not the one who left," she replied. "The one who stayed." They led him to the old archives, a sunken building beneath the chapel, accessible only through a tunnel choked with fungus. The air was wet, heavy with iron. Mold traced symbols across the walls like veins beneath skin. Inside, thousands of documents waited, but none were written. They were recorded, on flesh. Scrolls of treated skin stretched across wooden spools, etched with sigils, names, dates. Some were small, child-sized, their corners marked with the symbol of the Eighth. Others were stitched together into grim banners, stretched between hooks. And then Constance handed him one. She unrolled it gently. "You were born here," she said. Michael stared down. There, written in what looked like burned ink. Michael Thomas Rowan, born 1983, initiated 1989, removed 1990. "No," he whispered. "No, I was adopted. My parents took you," she said gently, "but they never removed the mark." She reached forward and traced the back of his neck, something strung. He reached up, felt it, a raised scar he'd never noticed before. Small, circular, 7 points. "Every child born within the parish is named in the Eighth," she said. "Not all survive, but you did." Michael backed away. His knees buckled. He hit the dirt, staring up at her. Constance towered above him, face unreadable beneath the veil. "You were meant to return. It was only a matter of remembering." That night, he found the photos. In the rectory attic, hidden beneath a warped floorboard. Old, sun-damaged photographs, edges curled from heat, ink faded. Children in white robes. A masked figure holding a ceremonial blade. A stone basin filled with dark water, and the reflection of something wrong. In one photo, he saw himself, 6 years old, crying, being held down by 2 masked men as a woman with red-stained hands reached toward his mouth. He flipped the photo over. On the back, scrawled in red ink, "He will drink, he will forget, but the root will grow again." Chapter 8, The Birth Chamber. The door wasn't marked. No lock, no handle, just a flat panel of wood beneath the chapel altar, warped with time and damp to the touch. But Michael had seen it open, in the reflection. Hours after midnight, long after the oil lamps had guttered out, and the air was heavy with mildew and incense, he saw it move. Not swing, not creak, just shift, as if the wood had never been solid. Now he stood before it, alone. The congregation had vanished with the nightfall bells. The grounds were quiet. Even the insects outside had stopped. The world held its breath. Michael pushed. The door opened inward with a wet, sucking sound. like muscle separating from bone. The stairwell was narrow and steep, stone-lined with a slick black moss that pulsed faintly in the dark. He didn't need a flashlight. The moss glowed, and something deeper below hummed, faintly harmonic, like a hymn made from exhalations. He descended. The birth chamber wasn't what he expected. It wasn't a room. It was a womb. A vast cavern hollowed out beneath the earth, its walls soft with layered root structures that wept clear sap, dripping into trenches carved to channel it toward the center. There, in the center of the chamber, was a cradle, made not of wood or stone, but vertebrae bent and woven into a half-dome, cradling a shallow pool of thick, viscous water. Suspended above it was an iron cross, upside down, with thorned vines spiraling around its arms. On the walls, icons were painted, not saints, not angels, figures with weeping wounds in place of eyes, infants with open rib cages, mothers with mouths sewn shut. Michael approached the cradle. Inside the fluid, something moved. He leaned over. A face, his own, but younger, hollow, pale as ash. It stared up at him, blinked, then opened its mouth and screamed silently. The fluid rippled violently, sending pulses of cold up his spine. He staggered back, gasping. "She gave birth here," said a voice behind him. Michael spun. Constance, unmasked now. Her face lined, not aged, etched. Like each wrinkle had been carved by ritual, her eyes glistened with oil. "To you, to the first," she said, and through her to all the others. She walked toward the cradle, laid a hand on its rim. The church forgot what pain means, forgot that sacrifice must cost something, but the garden remembers. This isn't God," Michael said. "No," Constance whispered. "This is older than God. This is the wound that made him." She gestured to the pool. "This is where it began, where the eighth first opened the path. The bloodline is not metaphor, it is literal. Through pain, through blood, we reshape the soul." Michael looked again. The water had cleared, and in it he saw them. Children, dozens, maybe hundreds, kneeling before masked clergy. Their mouths sewn with thread, their arms outstretched, offering flesh into the waiting hands of something just off frame. Something that breathed through the walls. He fell to his knees. "What do you want from me?" he choked. "To finish what was started," she said. She reached into her robe and produced a small blade, iron, old, uneven. "You were meant to carry the scar forward. You were taken too early. But the garden called you back." Michael shook his head. "No, you don't get to tell me who I am. We don't tell you, we show you," she said. "And you remember." She knelt beside him, raised the blade, touched it to the scar at the back of his neck. Instantly, everything came back. The scent of boiled milk and charred bone. The sound of masked voices singing as blood ran into the baptismal font. The cold weight of chains on his child's shoulders. His mother's hands, slick with oil, pressing his face into the wound in the earth. "You'll be clean. We'll all be clean." And behind it, beneath it, within it, something watching him. Not with eyes, but with recognition. The garden knew his name. Michael screamed. Darkness swelled from the wound, coating the walls. The icons wept sap. The pool turned black. Constance whispered something into his ear, and everything went silent. Chapter 9, Father. When Michael awoke, he was back in his quarters. His hands were clean. The blade was gone. The scar at the back of his neck burned faintly, but now there was something new. A pressure behind his eyes, like something coiled beneath them. Watching with him, or through him, he sat up. The candles were already lit. The silver bowl on the bedside table had been replaced with a chalice of black water. Floating in it, a single white seed, cracked open. The door to the rectory was open. Outside, the congregation had gathered. Dozens of masked figures, cloaked in robes dyed the color of rust and soot. They stood in perfect silence, their posture, reverent, waiting for him. Michael stepped outside. Not a word was spoken, but heads bowed, hands pressed over hearts. Some wept. He stepped into the crowd. They parted around him, not out of fear, out of recognition. Sister Constance walked beside him now, her head lowered in deference. A small brass censer swung from her hand, releasing a thick smoke that smelled of copper and sap. "You carry it now," she said softly. "What do I carry?" he asked. "The memory," she whispered, "that which was buried but never rotted. You remember the pain, so you may now receive the rest." Michael tried to speak, but her hand gripped his arm. Firm, gentle. "They need you to listen, Father." The chapel had changed. Where once stood rows of old pews and weathered icons, there were now rows of kneeling parishioners, each facing inward toward the altar, masks removed. Their mouths were sewn closed with black thread, tight and raw. At the foot of the altar, a chair. Old, ornate, ironwood, carved with the seven-hooked symbol of the eighth. Michael stared at it, and knew without doubt it had always been his. They brought in the first penitent, a young man, eyes downcast, arms scarred with devotional marks, self-inflicted, old and fresh. His shirt was open at the chest, where a symbol had been burned into his skin. He dropped to his knees. Constance stood behind him, one hand on his shoulder. "He has not slept in 7 days," she said, her voice quiet and even. "He says he dreams of infants drowning in honey. He says he tastes teeth in the bread. He believes he has been unfaithful in thought." Michael blinked. I'm not. You are," she said. "You are the wound, the listening flesh. You are the sacrament now." The penitent raised his head. Tears streamed freely down his face. "Please," he whispered. "I don't want to forget anymore. Let me remember. Let me hurt again." Michael reached forward, unsure why. His hand trembled. He placed 2 fingers against the young man's brow, and the world shifted. A flood of images surged into his mind, not his own. Memories, fragments, confessions. A child buried alive to silence the voices of his mother. A girl whose mouth was filled with candle wax before her first communion. A man weeping as he carved names into his forearms, hoping God would finally answer. Michael cried out, pulled back. The young man collapsed, smiling, peaceful. Sister Constance nodded. "He is remembered," she said. Michael staggered from the chapel sometime after midnight. He vomited in the grass, head pounding, skin cold. His hands shook. Inside him, a second heartbeat, slow, heavy, rooted. He fell to his knees and wept, and the earth beneath him whispered back, not in words, but in warmth, approval. Chapter 10, Litany of the Veins. Michael didn't sleep that night. Not in the way sleep had once meant. Instead, he drifted somewhere between dream and memory, visions flickering behind his eyelids like candlelight through stained glass. Each image smelled of smoke and vinegar, like blood left too long in sun. In the dream, he walked a corridor. Narrow, earthen, root-veined walls. He wasn't alone. Children knelt along the sides, each holding small reliquaries. Teeth, threads, folded skin. They whispered prayers into the wood. Some blinked without eyelids. Some cried without sound. All of them wore the mark, the same scar that throbbed beneath the nape of his neck. He reached the end of the corridor and opened the door. Inside was himself, younger, kneeling, and behind him masked clergy in the 7-hooked cassocks of St. Leontius, all humming the same low, guttural chant. Through pain, through flesh, through memory, the wound reopens. Michael awoke gagging on his own name. By morning, the chapel bells didn't ring. They throbbed, dull, organic, like something knuckling against bone from inside the steeple. Michael dressed in silence. His robes now hung from a peg by the window, deep rust red, the color of old scabs. The cloth was impossibly soft, and when he ran his fingers across the fabric, it twitched. He put it on. There was no mirror in the rectory, but he didn't need one. He felt how he looked, like memory dressed in skin. Sister Constance waited by the well behind the chapel. Today, the water was red. Not crimson, something darker, like aged wine. It shimmered faintly, even without sunlight. "It blooms," she said quietly, nodding to the water. "It knows you've returned." Michael stared. "I don't know what I am anymore," he said. "A priest, a prophet, a prisoner." Constance smiled, gently, with pity. "You're the root, Father, and the root remembers everything." She handed him a small chalice. Brass, unadorned. He dipped it into the well. The water steamed. "Drink," she said, "so the garden may speak." He drank. At first it tasted like rust and sage, then something else, like honey infused with teeth. And then he saw it, a cathedral beneath the skin, pews carved into muscle, an altar beating with shared memory, a cross made of interlocked arms. Above it all, a throat endlessly opening, chanting with 1,000 tongues. Michael fell forward, and the garden took root. When he awoke, he wasn't in the rectory. He was in the confession room, but not the one from before. This one was grown from bone. The walls pulsed. The lattice of ribs above him clattered gently with each exhale from the room itself. In the center, the penitent's chair. Not iron this time, but something grown soft, yet unyielding, warm to the touch. Sister Constance stood beside it. A new penitent knelt before them, a girl, maybe 12, her mask removed. Her eyes were milky. Threads stitched her lips. She trembled but did not cry. Her family gave her willingly, Constance said. Born into the garden, she cannot speak, but she remembers. Michael stepped forward. The girl lifted her face, and her hands reached out, not to offer anything, but to receive. Michael touched her fingers, and he saw a birthing room filled with mud, a man with no tongue whispering from a tree, a memory not yet lived, of flames licking through veins and a voice saying, "You must break to be filled," he wept, and the girl smiled. He performed 3 more liturgies before dusk. Each penitent offered their memory. Each time Michael took it in, held it, bled it, released it. By sunset, his nose bled freely, and something moved behind his eyes. That evening, as he lay half dreaming on the chapel floor, Constance approached him with a copper bowl. Floating inside, 7 teeth, each carved with a different glyph. "The first rites are complete," she said. "Now comes the cleaving." "The what?" She placed the bowl at his feet. "The sacrament of division, to separate what you were from what you must become. Tonight, you will lie beneath the altar, and the garden will open you." He wanted to scream. Instead, he nodded, because some part of him already understood. He was no longer there to choose. He was there to be grown. Chapter 11, the root crown. There was no sunrise. Not because morning hadn't come, but because Michael couldn't tell where the sky ended and his vision began. He opened his eyes and saw only shapes, ribs, wood, blood. Every surface pulsed. Every inch of the chapel now seemed closer, alive. The rafters above him stretched and curved, not like beams, but like spines. His breath misted in the air, and when it drifted upward, it was taken in by the ceiling, as if the church inhaled him. He tried to rise, but the roots were still inside him, not holding him down, not exactly. They weren't external things. They were part of him now, coiled inside his muscles like second tendons, tickling along his spine, fused to his nerves like old trauma. Each time he moved, something deeper moved with him, not in resistance, in accompaniment. He made it to the altar by crawling. The chapel was silent. The air was thick with incense and hum, a constant low vibration, like breath exhaled through hollow stone. He leaned against the altar. It pulsed under his palms. "You are nearly complete," came Constance's voice. She was above him, somewhere near the pulpit, lit by candlelight from beneath. Her robes were soaked, not with water, not with wine. Something thicker, something that shimmered with tissue. "You've accepted the pain," she said softly. "Now you must speak it." "Speak?" Michael asked. His voice felt distant, like an echo arriving late. "Not in words," she said. "In marrow." She stepped forward, carrying something wrapped in velvet. When she unwrapped it, Michael saw what it was. A crown, not gold, not iron. Bone, pale and intricate, made of fused finger bones twisted into barbs and hooks. At the center, embedded deep, was a tooth, his own, from childhood. The one his mother had wrapped in a cloth and placed beneath the stone of the old prayer well in their backyard. He hadn't remembered it until now. He hadn't been allowed to. "It's ready for you," Constance whispered. "All the memories, all the names, all the pain that built this place, it will live in you now." Michael backed away. "I didn't come here to be this," he whispered. "You were never Michael," she said, and then she reached toward him and placed the crown upon his head. The pain was immediate, not like fire, not like blades, like recognition. Like his body suddenly remembered that it had once been something else, something more porous, more open. The crown rooted itself into the meat of his skull, small hooked fingers digging through scalp, into bone, into thought. Michael screamed, and the church answered. Every surface trembled, every pew cracked and wept sap. The floor rippled. The stained glass behind the altar didn't break, it melted, revealing not sunlight, but veins, strung like webbing across a yawning wound in the wall. And through it, the garden poured. A smell of rotting lilies and birthing flesh. 1,000 voices humming from the shadows, not in prayer, but in acknowledgement. The congregation entered silently, maskless, threaded mouths torn open. Their chests bore fresh incisions, X-shaped, held open by bone clamps. Within each wound, small white buds pulsing faintly. They knelt before Michael, not out of faith, out of necessity. He tried to speak, but he no longer had words. Instead, he raised his hand. The roots within him extended, through his fingers, into the air, into the pews, into them, and they welcomed it. One by one, they bowed deeper, not in deference, but in relief. A collective breath moved through the room, and then Michael saw it, the chamber beneath the chapel floor, through the eyes of the garden. Not dirt, not stone, not foundation. Flesh, mothers buried alive, roots threaded through their mouths. Each sacrament a seeding, each prayer a fertilization, each forgotten name a whisper in the mycelium network binding this place together. He wasn't at the head of a religion. He was wearing its face. Constance approached. Her hands bled freely. "The garden is awake," she whispered. "You must prepare it." "For what?" Michael managed. "For communion," she said. "The first true Eucharist, of thought, of flesh, of inheritance." "There's nothing left of me." She touched his chest. "That's why it works." Chapter 12. The listening flesh. They gathered in the chapel at dusk, not by bells, not by decree. They came because he was ready. Michael stood at the altar, hands outstretched. The bone crown had begun to sprout. Tiny filaments of white cartilage stretched upward from its tips like fungal stalks, searching. His eyes no longer blinked, not from blindness, but from clarity. He had no need for sight. He could feel every breath in the room, every tremor, every thought like a root brushing against his mind from beneath the floorboards. There were no pews now, only earth, raked smooth and soft, veined with sap. The congregation stood barefoot in it. The ground drank from their feet. Sister Constance approached with the book of names, not written on parchment, but grown from skin. Its pages were branded, not inked. Her hands shook as she passed it to him. "You are the wound," she said. "You are the eighth. Speak the sacrament." He opened the book, and it screamed, not aloud, but in memory, a cascade of voices flooding him at once. Infants sobbing, mothers praying into pillows soaked with blood, children naming gods that did not answer. Michael raised one hand. The room held its breath. Then he tore the book in half. Silence fell. Constance collapsed to her knees. Others gasped. Some wept openly, curling into the dirt. "This is not how it is done," she whispered. Michael stepped down from the altar. "No," he said, his voice no longer just his. "This is how it was done." He walked barefoot into the crowd. The earth cracked beneath each step, blooming with pale tendrils, mycelium, writhing up from below, winding around ankles, thighs, torsos. Not binding, not strangling, embracing. Michael placed a hand on the forehead of a weeping man, and the man laughed, not from joy, but from relief. His eyes rolled back. His mouth tore at the stitches. He began to chant in a language no one knew. A second woman dropped to her knees. A third tore open her chest, offering a small bundle of tangled roots she'd been growing beneath the skin. One by one, they stepped forward, not seeking absolution, seeking participation. Michael returned to the altar and knelt. The wound in the wall behind him began to open fully this time, not as a slit, but as a birth canal. From it came the sacrament, not a god, not a devil, a shape. A thing made from every memory they had tried to forget, trauma woven into a body, suffering given form, a being composed of nothing but echoes. It had no face, only a hollow, gaping circle where one should be, like a mouth that never closed. Its body was clad in flesh strips braided into vestments, and around its neck, a rosary made of teeth. Michael rose to meet it. The garden spoke, not aloud, not even through thought, through Michael's own mouth. "There is no salvation," it said. "There is no forgiveness. There is only remembrance." The congregation answered, not with sound, but with gesture. They raised their hands in unison and pressed their palms against their own scars. Michael stepped forward. The sacrament raised one long, many-jointed arm and pressed its hand against his chest. "Do you carry it?" it asked. "I do. Do you remember the wound?" "I never forgot." The being nodded and entered him, Not as possession, not as infection, as completion. Michael convulsed once, then fell still. From his eyes spilled a thin sap that smelled of honey and rust. His body hovered above the altar for a moment, limbs loose, heart exposed. The bone crown cracked, and from its center bloomed a single white flower. The garden had bloomed. The congregation fell to the earth as one. Their mouths opened, no longer sewn, no longer screaming, just open, waiting. Weeks later, a storm passes over St. Leontius. The roads are washed out. Power lines snapped. A rescue team hikes in from the parish diocese. They find no signs of violence, no corpses, no blood, only the chapel, now hollowed. Its walls are gone, only ribcage arches remain. Beneath them, fertile, red-black earth. And in the altar's place, a flowering tree with white leaves and bone-colored fruit. Every leaf whispers a name when touched. Some of them are names no one remembers anymore, but the garden does. The garden remembers everything. You made it back for now, but the things in the dark never truly leave, do they? They watch, they wait, and perhaps they remember you now too. If you want to hear more, if you dare to listen again, step back into the shadows. Like the video, subscribe, but know this, some doors once opened do not close so easily.